Welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. We've got a great program lined up for you today. In just a little bit, our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, will join us to talk about a few different topics, including the response from the Mexican president on the U.S. strikes on alleged drug-running boats out in the Pacific. And a little later, we're also going to hear from our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, as well, to get more information on that biometric data collection coming to the southern border, and a few other timely topics as we head into Dia de los Muertos this weekend. But first, as always, let's go ahead and start by taking a look at what's trending across the border, starting with the Department of Homeland Security saying that violent threats against ICE agents have seen an 8,000% increase in death, as well as death threats against them. From bounties to stalking and doxing online, Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said, quote, ICE officers are experiencing an unprecedented level of violence and threats against them and their families. This violence against law enforcement must end, end quote. DHS says ICE officers' family members have been doxed and threatened and had bounties placed on their head for their murders. ICE arrests across the country have led to protests and have sparked outrage from residents as well as immigrant advocacy groups. Moving on to the next story, Border Patrol Commander-at-Large Greg Bovino was back in a Chicago federal courtroom to sit for a deposition regarding the use of non-lethal weapons used on demonstrators and journalists at an ICE facility. Earlier this week, a judge barred federal agents from using tear gas, pepper balls, and rubber bullets on protesters without first issuing a warning. She says those agents are not following her court order. She also ordered Bovino to report daily about ICE operations in and around Chicago, a ruling that was actually put on hold by an appeals court. Bovino himself on Fox News said he was looking forward to the check-ins so he can prove to the judge how bad things really are on the streets of Chicago. And in other news, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said nearly 150 truck drivers in Indiana have been arrested as part of Operation Midway Blitz. She was in Gary, Indiana this morning. For those of you that don't know, it's right outside of Chicago, and where she said in total 223 undocumented immigrants were detained, and 146 of them, she says, were truckers. Dozens of them had been issued commercial driver's license. Authorities have made an effort to target truck drivers in Indiana in a recent roadway operation. ICE leadership and the Trump administration has repeatedly claimed that they are deporting, quote, the worst of the worst. However, 71% of people in ICE detention have no criminal convictions as of September 21st, according to a website that tracks government immigration data. And that is a look at what's making headlines across the border. It is time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz. Julian, you have been following what's going on with these boat strikes by U.S. forces on alleged drug-running boats out in the Pacific. Can you bring us up to speed, sir?
Just this week, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth disclosed some new attacks, and he characterized the places where this bombing of drug-carrying boats had taken place as the Eastern Pacific Ocean. Now, it just so happens that we learned from Mexican sources that that pretty much means west of the Mexican coast. And that is making the president of Mexico really nervous because she is concerned that those strikes, although they are taking place outside of her territorial waters, on international waters, are very close, she says, to Mexico's exclusive economic zone. And that is about 200 miles from the coast of Mexico into the Pacific. And pretty much it means that her country's fishing boats have exclusive rights and all that. So she's concerned about the economic impact, the possibility of Mexican citizens actually getting hit by these strikes. Mexico also got involved with some coordination in the latest strikes because Secretary Hegseth said that he notified Mexico about possible survivors of one of the attacks. And the Mexican Navy deployed its ships out there to the area of the attacks. However, I understand from Mexican media that they were not able to rescue anybody. If there were any survivors, they could not find them. Now, here we have some images of some of the latest strikes. And like I said, this would be happening about a few hundred miles west of the Mexican coast. You see boats that U.S. intelligence has says it has documented were carrying drugs being struck by, they call them kinetic attacks. Pretty much, I take that to mean missiles or other sort of aerial bombardment. So to make a long story short, we have a clip from the Mexican president expressing her concerns about the bombings. If we can play it, please.
Con estas intervenciones. Y tenemos un modelo, un protocolo.
We are not in agreement with these actions, and we have a protocol that has yielded results. If the United States sees a boat in international waters allegedly carrying drugs, they should coordinate and either our Navy or the American government agencies intervene and detain the suspects. What we asked of the ambassador is that this protocol be improved, but that it remains in place. First, because we don't want violations to our sovereignty or operations in our economic zone. Secondly, because there could be Mexican citizens, whether criminal or not, in these ships.
En el marco de los acuerdos de seguridad que tenemos con los Estados Unidos, pero que se siga operando.
The president of Mexico asked her foreign minister to summon the U.S. ambassador in Mexico to a meeting to express these concerns. And she also made reference to standing accords that go back several administrations between the two countries to interdict drug runners near their coast. In this case, what the president of Mexico is calling for is, hey, you see a boat carrying drugs somewhere near the Mexican coast, please notify us. And we'll go out there and effect an interdiction, detain the suspects, seize the drugs, or you can do this yourselves. She's not. She's obviously like many other world leaders, is not in agreement with the precedent set by this extraterritorial bombings in international waters. She's very concerned, and like she said in the video, one of these boats, and I'll make a parenthesis there because we don't know, for the most part, which country's citizens have been killed in those strikes. But she is concerned that some Mexican citizens, like she said, whether criminals or not, might be targeted, might be killed, and she wants to avoid that. So again, we see a case in which Mexico is pretty much between a rock and a hard place as far as responding or adjusting to unprecedented actions by the Trump administration.
Yeah, that seems to be the common theme whenever we talk about something, on this kind of subject here is how does Mexico, both please their people and retain their sovereignty as they see it, and also not to, muddy the waters with whatever they've got going on with the United States. So thank you for your reporting on that, Julian. You've also been working on another report when it comes to medical tourism in Juarez. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Rudy, what I can tell you is that right now we have a couple of happenings kind of coming together. One is that in the U.S., there's a lot of reports that healthcare is going to get a lot more expensive. Health insurance is going to get a lot more expensive because of the federal government shutdown, the possible suspension of subsidies for Obamacare, and just in general, the having a health insurance becomes more expensive. So as this is going on, south of the border, cities like Juarez, which is right across the border from El Paso, are taking this moment to remind people, visitors from the U.S., that there are healthcare alternatives, very affordable, very cheap even, south of the border. Here in El Paso, many of our citizens, many of our residents, for a long time have been just crossing the international bridge and going to Juarez to seek dental services, to get prescription glasses, or to just go take care of a pulmonary infection or a kidney infection. So we have these two things going on at the same time. Mexico wants to increase medical tourism. In the U.S., a lot of U.S. residents, especially those with low to moderate income, are in this conundrum of their health insurance premiums possibly going on. So Juarez providers are getting together. They have a meeting. They call it a Congress, Medical Tourism Congress, coming up in about 3 weeks. in which they're going to discuss strategies, how to capitalize on this trend going on in the U.S. and bring more people to their dentist offices, to the doctor's offices, to the eye doctors, taking advantage that healthcare is getting more expensive in the U.S.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Julian. We appreciate your reporting on both those subjects. Medical tourism is something we see down here in the Rio Grande Valley a lot. A lot of snowbirds down here, folks that either come down just for the winters to get away from that Midwest and northern states snow and cold. And a lot of them, take that as an opportunity to do all their health checkups, things like that. So it should be interesting to see which direction that ends up going. El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz with us, but please stay with us because after the break, San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera is going to be joining us to dive a little deeper on that story that he's been following about biometric data collection coming to a border crossing near you. Stay with us. Border Report Live. We'll be back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles. I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas. And joining me now is our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera. Sal, we wanted to bring you back in because you have just been diving deep on this new biometric data collection program that's going to be happening at the ports of entry. You've got some new reporting on it, so please fill us in.
Well, there's new concerns. We have already heard about the privacy concerns. We've also heard that the biometrics, the gathering of this information, the pictures that are taken don't work very well at times with people of color. So there's a lot of concerns there. Now we're hearing about others. These is coming from researchers at Colegio de la Frontera, which is a research center, a think tank, if you will, and they have been looking into this biometrics gathering data program and what it entails. Now, their biggest concern is, well, if you got to be stopping everybody so we can take their pictures and fingerprints, and by everybody, I mean non-citizens. These are people who have resident status in the U.S., people who cross the border with visas, seasonal workers, even children. If we're going to be taking their picture and their fingerprints, it's going to slow things down. And if you multiply it by 40,000 people who cross the border on a daily basis, this is only going to back up the lines even more. So 2 to 3 hour waits could turn into 4 or 5 hour waits. And this is now the main concern that people have, the researchers have. Now, they're saying that this is also going to be done on the way out. There's ports of entry that already have booths, inspection areas that are patrolled and staffed by U.S. Customs or CBP officers. They're not always there, but these are already equipped with the technology to photograph people on the way out. The concern is that at times the officers will have to physically, manually take a camera and be taking pictures of everybody in a car, their fingerprints. This is going to slow things down, not just for people coming into the U.S., but for people who are driving out or walking out of the U.S. at places such as the San Ysidro Port of Entry that you see there. This is the pedestrian east port of entry at the San Ysidro border crossing. So the concerns are not only who is going to have this data, how will it be shared, how will it be stored, how secure will the information be? And now it's like, well, is the gathering of this data, this information, going to delay and really add to the crossing times of ports of entry and bridges throughout the southern border?
It's interesting that you say that they're just going to be out there with cameras and taking pictures. Did I hear that right?
Yes. Well, they have the special cameras now because they're not all set up. And there are times where people could be ducking underneath or in the back seat, and they're not in the view of the cameras that are permanently set up. So they will physically have to kind of walk over and then scan your face, your eyes, and that's how they're going to gather this information. In this process, there's a fear that it'll take a lot of time to do, especially when you have thousands and thousands of people entering the U.S. And then on the way out, they will have some some sort of similar program for people as they're exiting the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting because just recently my wife and I were in our little boy. We were headed up to Dallas from a flight out of here in McAllen. And I guess it had been a while since I had taken a flight because it was something that was different. Before you even handed your boarding pass and your ID to that TSA agent, they told you to step up to this little box that would kind of take a second to take a picture. And I saw a lot of confusion for people when they were getting up to that point in the line. So, it makes me wonder how much longer it would take to get through that point when you've got someone actually having to hand jam, if you will, all these photos individually one by one and moving down the line. And not only that, kind of having to explain what's going on because to so many people, this is, on both sides of the border, wherever they may live, it's going to be very, very foreign and a little concerning for them. So very interesting stuff. Thank you for your reporting on this. Another thing we kind of talked about a little bit earlier this week, Salvador, was the concerns over Dia de los Muertos festivals that are going to be taking place, not just, along the southern border where Latino communities are very heavy and big, but all across the country, really. And we've actually talked about this a little bit in prior weeks leading up to the actual day of Dia de los Muertos, that some of the Hispanic Heritage Month celebrations that have been happening across the country, there was a lot of concerns over immigration enforcement during those. What can you tell us about some of these warnings that are now coming out?
Well, U.S. Customs and Border Protection put out a kind of a requisites of warning of things that people cannot do on their way back from Mexico if they do go into places like Tijuana, where they are expecting anywhere from 200 to 300,000 people to visit the 14 cemeteries that are operated by the city of Tijuana. There are others that are privately owned, but they're expecting 200 to 300,000 people to go visit their loved ones at the cemeteries. And these include people from north of the border who are going to be making the trek into Mexico to partake in the Dia de los Muertos celebrations. Of course, this encompass or entail taking food and music and pictures, setting up altars at cemeteries. So it turns into quite a festival. If you multiply by the people who do partake, this is quite an undertaking. A lot of people moving back and forth. Now, the concern by Customs and Border Protection that on the way back, or people who are coming from Mexico to the U.S. to visit their dead, their departed loved ones at cemeteries, will be bringing with them items, articles that are not allowed. We're talking about flowers and fruits and other things that are of big concern to U.S. authorities. We're talking like marigolds because they carry a cotton bug that could devastate the cotton industry in the United States. So they prevent people from being the marigolds are into the border or across the border. There's a muralla plant, which is the orange yasmin, which is also brings in little tiny insects that could affect the citrus industry, wipe it out in the United States. There are also a lot of restrictions when it comes to fruits and vegetables, in particular, oranges, tangerines, limes, guavas, mangoes, peaches, pomegranates. So a lot of these materials are not allowed into the U.S., and they're asking people to please be careful when you're packing up the car as you try to get north of the border to attend Dia de los Muertos celebrations. There's also heavy fines for people who may be found in violation. They range from $300 to as much as $250,000 for people who are running commercial operations and knowingly try to cross these items north of the border. So there are penalties involved for folks who don't abide by the rules. So another reason to be careful as you try to celebrate Dia de los Muertos north of the border. And if you're going south, the administration, the mayoral administration in Tijuana is telling people to please do not litter, you can't drink at cemeteries, and try to be civil, try to maintain order. Cemeteries in Mexico, or at least in Tijuana, will be open from 8 in the morning till 4 p.m. And authorities in Tijuana are saying, please, try to be civil, try to be understanding, compassionate, considerate of others who are also visiting cemeteries for Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up what you can bring back because, so often when we think of smuggling, right, we think of people, we think of drugs, we think of maybe even animals that are exotic, that will be used as exotic pets here in the United States, but no one ever thinks about the flowers, the fruits, the vegetables, the gifts that you may get from another family member when you go to visit them. You know, a $250,000 fine, that's a pretty hefty fine. But, you know, as we talk about here all the time, it's one of those things you kind of have to look out for when you're going back and forth, because it can be a whole array of different items. Have you ever heard of any of these? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but have you ever heard of any like fines that, you know, are kind of crazy that maybe like resulted from an accident by chance?
I have not. I know people have been prosecuted for bringing animals, exotic animals like monkeys and white tigers. I've heard of that, but for people trying to bring oranges or pork, other items that are prohibited in the U.S. or at least prohibited from entering the U.S. from Mexico, I really have not heard of anybody getting a big ticket like that.
Yeah, and it's best always to be safe rather than sorry, though, especially when it comes to beef right now with all the issues with the screwworm discoveries and things like that. You know, that it's just a wide array of things that I don't think people typically consider that could get them in trouble. And, you know, the opposite going over the border, going into Mexico, especially for those of us that may live in Texas like me or Julian, something to keep in mind is if you're in a state that allows for you to carry a weapon, you know, make sure your car is clean of everything that could even remotely resemble a weapon or a piece of a weapon, because I've heard stories here and spoken with people who have, you know, spent a couple weeks in a jail cell in Matamoros for getting to take out one little piece of brass that had already been, you know, shot and that they had just kept from the shooting range. So just a wide array of things to think about before you go over, or if you're coming over here. So keep that in mind for folks that are watching us and maybe planning to make that trip. Thank you so much for joining us today, Salvador. Appreciate you being here, sir.
You bet. Anytime.
All right. That was our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera. Stay with us because while he may not be with us live for the next part, we do have a little reporting that kind of piggybacks on our little discussion last week about the World Series and a very specific player that's making waves for the Toronto Blue Jays. We're talking about Alejandro Kirk. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles. I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Now, the Toronto Blue Jays are one win away from winning this year's World Series, and many baseball fans in Tijuana are cheering for their native son, Alejandro Kirk. We talked about him last week. He's a catcher for the Blue Jays. Admiration for the player led a Mexican artist to paint a mural of Kirk in Tijuana. Our Salvador Rivera continues the story.
Like a lot of young men who play baseball along the border, Alejandro Kirk also played ball in San Diego, including right on this field with Chula Vista South Pony League. Alejandro Kirk has become another source of pride for many along the San Diego-Tijuana border. So much so, this mural has been painted in his honor along the northbound lanes at the San Isidro port of entry.
I'm super proud.
Adolfo Hernandez was about to cross the border when he stopped to talk about Kirk, who seems to be captivating everyone with his hitting and his personal story.
To see him reach this level of play in the World Series, and not only that, but standing out in these games. The truth is, he will always be a source of pride more than anything for all of us.
Roberto, even though he is rooting for the Dodgers, said he can't help but support Kirk and others from the area.
Tijuana has always stood out in producing athletes that excel. But to see him reach this level of success, it is truly a source of inspiration.
That inspiration led artists in Tijuana to paint the mural. In case you didn't know, Kirk is an all-star catcher with the Toronto Blue Jays, who are playing the Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series. Kirk has already hit a couple of home runs, including a 3-run shot Monday night. Richard Ortega is beaming with pride, knowing Kirk is from the Tijuana-San Diego region. Kirk, who is 26 years of age, began catching at the age of 12 in Tijuana. Along the way, he was invited to play north of the border at the Chula Vista South Pony League, where he also found himself behind the plate, hitting home runs like he is doing right now in the World Series. Salvador Rivera, Border Report.
All righty, that was some great reporting, Sal. We appreciate it. Just wanted to remind you, if you missed this episode or any other episode of Border Report Live, you can always stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while you're on your commute. Maybe you're walking the dog, taking the kid out to the playground, because Border Report Live is now bringing you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in audio form. You can find us now on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, as well as video and audio on YouTube. And also just wanted to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. They track the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics based on data. So make sure to check it out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. For Salvador Rivera and Julian Resendiz, my name's Rudy Mireles. See you tomorrow.